Good day, guys. Today we're going to be doing lesson 1 of We the People. It is going to be one single video, and you do have a worksheet that you're responsible for doing and completing. There are exercises throughout the chapter. I would like you to just do them, but you don't need to write anything down. Just really read through them is what I'd like you to do. So that part I won't be reading. Some of them I will, like the critical thinking. I think that's important. There is terms to know as well. But what would life be like in a state of nature? The purpose of this lesson is it introduces you to some basic ideas of the natural rights of philosophy and theories of government that were of great importance in the development of our government. These major ideas include the state of nature, the law of nature, natural rights, consent, and the social contract. You learn about these ideas as they were developed by the English philosopher John Locke. When you finish this lesson, you should be able to describe how and why the natural right philosophies used an imaginary state of nature to think about the basic problems of government. You should also be able to explain some of the basic ideas of the natural rights philosophy. Finally, you should be able to explain that the purpose of government based on the natural rights of philosophy is to preserve our natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Okay? There are terms to know. Once I told you, what you need to do. What is the natural rights philosophy? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government. That's in the Declaration of Independence. This excerpt from the Declaration of Independence includes some of the most important philosophical ideas underlying our form of government. They're ideas that had been familiar to almost everyone in the American colonies long before the Revolutionary War. These ideas had been preached in churches, written in pamphlets, and debated in public and private. They had been developed and refined by political philosophers such as the Englishman John Locke and others. Locke was the most important influence on the thinking of the founders at the time of the Revolution. Locke's political philosophy is often called the natural rights philosophy. The natural rights is based on imagining what life would be like if there was no government. Locke and others call this imaginary situation a state of nature. By this, Locke did not necessarily mean people living in a wilderness. A state of nature is a condition in which there is no government. For example, even with the existence of the United Nations, international relations between countries today operate in a state of nature. There is no superior power that can act effectively as a government over these individual states. Thinking about what life would be like if there were no government was very useful to philosophers such as Locke in answering questions like these. What is human nature? That is, what traits of personality and character, if any, do all human beings have in common? For example, are all people selfish, or do they tend to care for the good of others? What should be the purpose of the government? How do the people running a government get the right to govern? How should a government be organized? What kinds of government should be respected and supported? What kinds of government should be resisted and fought? The natural right philosophers' answers to these questions provided the foundation for many arguments, and the founders made to explain and justify their decision to separate from Britain. They also used the ideas in writing some state constitutions after the Revolutionary War, and later in writing the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. Now, there is a critical thinking exercise, okay? Once again, I want you to do these. You don't need to write it down, but it's going to help you understand the chapter better. So look them over at least, all right? I'm not going to read those to you, but you can do that. So we're going to go on to I guess we need to. So we will go back and do the critical thinking exercises. Okay. Taking the position of political philosopher. To understand the natural rights, you're going to go ahead and do this exercise. I'm just going to go through it real quick. Upon arrival, would there be any government or laws to control how you lived, what rights or freedoms you exercised, or what property you had, and why? Would anyone have the right to govern you? Would you have the right to govern anyone else? and why? Would you have any rights, and what would they be? What might people who were stronger or smarter than others try to do, and why? What might the weaker or less sophisticated people try to do? Why? What life would be like for everyone? Excuse me. How do your answers compare with those of John Locke? Your answers may be similar to those developed by John Locke, or they may differ. In this lesson, we are focusing on understanding Locke's answers because they were widely shared by Americans living during the 1700s. They also played a very important role in the development of our government. Locke believed that there were rules in a state of nature. He called these natural rules natural law or the law of nature. He said, the state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone. No one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. They were the laws of nature and of nature's God, as Thomas Jefferson called them in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson believed there were laws made by a supreme being for the benefit of human beings. Locke believed that most people understood this law of nature through the use of their reason and followed it because their consciences, obliged them to do so. Not all humans were reasonable or good. However, there might even be disagreement about that. But the laws of nature were. If there were no government, there would be no one with the right to interpret or enforce these laws. According to Locke, there would be no government because a government cannot exist until it has been created. A legitimate government cannot exist until the people have given their consent to be ruled by it. Thomas Jefferson included this idea in the Declaration when he wrote that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from consent of the governed. No one would have the right to govern you, nor would you have the right to govern anyone else. According to Locke, the only way anyone gets the right to govern anyone else is if that person gives his or her consent. If the people to be governed have not consented to the creation of a government, there's no legitimate government. Using his reasons to determine what rights were provided for by the law of nature, Locke asked himself, what are the things that all people always need and seek, no matter what they believe, no matter when or where they live? His answer identified the following rights. Life. People want to survive and they want their lives to be as free as possible from threats to their security. Liberty. People want to be as free as possible from the domination of others to be able to make their own decisions and to live as they please. Property. People want the freedom to work and gain economic goods such as land, houses, tools, and money, which are necessary to survival. These rights were called natural rights, and you would have the right to defend them if the other people threatened to take them away. These rights were called natural rights, and you would have the right to take. Oh, I just said that. Locke believed that the people are basically reasonable and sociable, but they are also self-interested. Since the only security people would have for the protection of their natural rights would be their own strength or cunning, people who were stronger or smarter would often try to take away the life, liberty, and property of the weak. Weaker or less sophisticated people might try to protect themselves by joining together against the strong. Since there would be no laws that everybody agreed upon and no government to enforce them, everybody's rights would be very insecure. So, this is another exercise. What do you think? And you're going to go ahead and you're going to go down that list. There's 4 of them. And try to, like I said, even think about it because it helps you absorb the lesson. Excuse me. What is the significance of Locke's definition of the natural rights to life, liberty, and property? References to human rights, political and economic rights, student rights, consumer rights, parental rights, other terms using the word appear in the news every single day. Rights is a word you are already familiar with. We have become so accustomed to the word, we often don't even think what it means. A right may be described as a justifiable claim to have or obtain something, or to act in a way that is justified on legal or moral grounds. For example, you might claim the right to practice your own religion and justify it by the First Amendment of the Constitution. In describing the concept of natural rights, philosophers like John Locke were making a bold new departure from the previous uses of the term rights. Before the time of Locke, the other natural rights philosophers and the concept of rights had been applied in a very limited and selective way. More often than not, rights were considered special privileges enjoyed only by certain groups, classes, or nations of people. There were exclusive rights not enjoyed by the outside group. The natural rights philosophers disagreed with this interpretation. They believed that people's opportunities should not be limited by the situation or group into which they were born. These philosophers regarded the individual, rather than the class or group, as the most important social unit. They saw society as a collection of individuals, all of whom shared the same right to pursue his or her own welfare. Locke, for example, defined natural rights in terms of life, liberty, and property because he considered them to be the essence of humanity. They are what makes us human beings and what define our purpose in life. They are inclusive rights belonging to every human being. These rights also considered to be unalienable, the word that Jefferson used in the Declaration. This means they are so much a part of human nature that they cannot be taken away or even given up. The sacred rights of mankind, said another founder, Alexander Hamilton, are written as with a sunbeam in the whole volume of human nature, by the hand of the divinity himself, and can never be erased or obscured by mortal power. Governments and societies based on the natural rights philosophy guarantee specific rights to preserve our natural rights. Under the U.S. Constitution, for example, you possess certain civil rights, securing such things as freedom of conscience and privacy, and protecting you from unfair discrimination by government or others. You also possess certain political rights, like the right to vote or run for office, which give you control over your government. Such civil and political rights serve to protect natural rights to life, liberty, and property. In an ideal state of nature, the law of nature would prevail. No one would have the right to interfere with your life and your freedom to acquire or hold property. Locke, however, realized that because not all human beings were rational or good, there would always be people who would try to violate your rights. Since there would not be any government, you and others would have to defend your rights on your own. The result would be that in the state of nature, your rights and your enjoyment would be insecure. You would be in a constant danger of losing them. For Locke and the other natural rights philosophers, the great problem was to find a way to protect each person's natural rights so that all persons could enjoy them and live at peace with one another. Locke said that the best way to solve this problem in the state of nature is for each individual to agree with others to create and live under a government, and give it to the power to make and enforce laws. This kind of agreement is called the social contract. As in all contracts, to get something, you must give up something. In the social contract, everyone promises to give up the absolute right to do anything he or she has the right to do in a state of nature. In return, everyone receives the security that can be provided by a government. Each person consents to obey the limits placed upon him or her by the laws created by the government. Everyone gains the security of knowing that his or her rights to life, liberty, and property are protected. Government then, is the better alternative to an imperfect state of nature where some people will not obey the laws of nature. Government's purpose is to protect those natural rights that the individual cannot effectively secure in a state of nature. There's a section here, it's called What Do You Think? Go over these questions. Really think about these. This will help you with that, like I said, absorbing the lesson. If the purpose of government is to provide security for the rights to life, liberty, and property, under what circumstances, if any, should government be able to limit these rights? What criteria should be used to determine when, if ever, government should be able to limit an individual's liberty to believe as he or she wishes, practice his or her beliefs, use his or her property, associate with whomever he or she wishes? Imagine yourself living in a community where all order and authority have broken down. Violent lawlessness is widespread. Do you think any government is better than none? Explain your answer. It's been said that since people are not equal in their intelligence and character, it is unjust for everyone to have the same rights. Do you agree? Be prepared to defend your answer. Okay. The last part of this is reviewing and using the lesson. Once again, it's one of those things you need to go over so you absorb it. It'll give you a better understanding. And I know it seems awfully crazy and awfully nerdy, but you'll appreciate it. You really will. It'll make more sense. It helps keep building on what we've already learned about our rights and what we've already studied. So this is what I'm doing. So the next step is for you to have a better understanding and be ahead of the game. All right? Stay healthy, be safe, and I miss you guys.